Hey everyone, welcome to the Cash Flow Debates podcast. My name is Eddy Hood and I'm here with my two partners, Dan Luthi and Ryan Steck. Now, I want to welcome you to this podcast. If this is the first time you've ever listened to us, I want to sort of lay the foundation for what we're going to be doing today. We want to talk about the sort of entrepreneur that would benefit from this show. There are, I would say 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs all kind of fall into the same mental, emotional bucket. Because running a business is really hard. It's not as easy as it looks. And if you've been running your business for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and you feel like you're busier than ever, you're not making the money you want, and you are just not really getting your goals, then this podcast is for you. Now, it's called the Cash Flow Debates because we have 3 personalities at the table. I'm a very entrepreneurial personality. Dan is a very operationally focused sort of person, which means we get to clash at times because we see things differently. And then Ryan is the financial brain at our company who looks at everything and says, can we afford that? And is that a good idea or not? So this show is really designed to address a specific topic in each episode with those different personalities in place. I'd like to go around the room really quickly and have these guys tell you where they're coming from and why they're here, and then we'll dig into this week's show. So Dan, who are you?
Yeah, as Eddy mentioned, I'm Dan Luthi. I'm as you mentioned, very operational person, but my focus really is on taking the construct of what a business is going through and what systems they've kind of created for themselves and potentially messes that they have and really unravel it to where they actually have a more streamlined operation flow. So that's everything from proposal building to giving recommendations on how they can get the contracts out to their clients to vendor manufacturing and managing relationships and utilizing technology along with just human process to be able to make sure that they're as efficient as they possibly can be.
Yeah, so that's like the behind the scenes guy who takes an entrepreneur's vision and says, okay, let's actually make this thing work. I love the idea, but let's see if we can bolt it together. So Ryan, what do you do?
I'm your bleeding heart CFO. And so what that really means is I'm coming in and I'm looking at entrepreneurs, looking at their business and saying, gosh, I really care about you. I see you as a person and you want to get somewhere as an individual. Your business is a vehicle, but ultimately you're someone who is trying to get somewhere in life. And my job is to come in and say, how do we get you there? And everyone's goals are different. Everyone is trying to get somewhere else, but I'm trying to care and try and get you where you want to be.
Good. So credential-wise, we all have, master's degrees in random things or CPAs or whatever. So we've been in this business for a long time, and we have looked under the hoods of hundreds of companies around the country in every industry, manufacturing, restaurants, point-of-sale systems, lots of daycares, hospitals, professional sports teams. We've been in lots of stuff, right? So I think it's critical to understand that when you get to look at the finances of a business, you get to see how things are actually happening. You get to see past all of the smoke and mirrors and see if things are really working or not. So that's what we hope to bring to this show for you, is a sense of real world honesty from a financial perspective so that you can run your business as an entrepreneur with some actual tangible tools versus just a bunch of hype. We're kind of tired of the hype. We want to get down to business and make things work for you. Gentlemen, let's get into this week's episode, shall we?
Absolutely.
All righty. Okay, here we go. So let's talk really quickly about what we see in terms of entrepreneurial sort of stress and the real workings of being a business owner. Or let's say you're a craftsman and you make doors for a company and you think, I could do this on my own. I'm really good at making doors, right? I'm going to start a business. Well, there is a lot of social media and a lot of hype that makes being a business owner a very sexy thing, right? So let's start there. What does the business world, the Inc. magazines, the Forbes magazines, social media, what sort of images are sent to us as to what our life could be like if we're business owners?
I like the reference you made to Inc. magazine. I think Forbes falls into that same category where you're seeing young 20-something people creating multi-billion-dollar businesses overnight. And we honestly don't usually see the background of it until they go through SEC audits, 5-10 years later when the product's not valid. But I think the part with that, though, is it shows a lot of glam around just creating a business and not really how you run a business.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that entrepreneurs usually run into the issue with is they're not prepared to run, but their ideas around creating.
Yeah, I got a really good idea, and I'm as smart as this guy, right? I probably could do it. But what a lot of people don't understand is when they see that picture on Forbes magazine of a sharp-dressed lady in a business suit or whatever, we don't always see the amount of debt she's carrying to support that business, or the promises she's made behind the scene, or the amount of stress that she is supporting on her shoulders to keep everybody happy in order to be on the cover of that magazine. And she might not have a penny to her name. She might be completely broke, right? We want to make sure that when you're building your business, that you're actually building real wealth and not just selling a bunch of stuff and being busy, right? There's a difference between generating revenue, owning a $10 million company that costs $10 million and $1 to run, or building real wealth. I'd rather have $1 million company that nets 200 grand in cash every year. It's much better. Ryan, what do you see in the social media glam?
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up social media because I have teenage daughters who always like to bring up, well, we need to go on vacations, and they'll pull up little TikToks or little posts on social media of amazing places that they find. And I found this website where you can go in and it'll say, okay, here's what the TikToker is showing this amazing vacation looks like. And then it'll show the next picture, this is what you're actually getting into. And I think that from a social media standpoint and from a business owner standpoint, everything's glamorized these days, whether it's business, whether it's travel, whether it's what your family life should be, it's all glamorized and it's all looks way better than it actually is. And from a business owner standpoint, if you're watching this, you're probably like 9 out of 10 business owners that is working long hours. Yeah. You are paying someone else more than you're paying yourself to actually run and work in the company. You're stressed with your family situation. Like, things are hard, but it sure looked like a great idea when you got into this.
Doesn't mean it's not rewarding because you're building something. I think there's a difference that we should point out there. I mean, I started this firm 15 years ago, and you two have been running alongside me, helping me build it ever since, right? And it's been very rewarding. But be honest, guys, has it been easy?
At times, sure. We've had moments, right?
Like we've had moments.
No, I think
it's been really hard.
I think the one piece for me is like to your point about the value proposition that comes from it. Like, not every business owner gets in business just to make $1 million, right? Some people really like what they do. They're going through that piece. I think my hope, just in sharing the context with people, is that we can give you hope that there's a better way of doing things and things you should be thinking about through that process. But for us specifically, no, it's been hard. We've had to revamp processes over and over again. We've had to change marketing and sales strategies. We've had to determine when to downsize and when to upsize. And that's complexity.
I think it's a jaded question where you're always walking this fine line between the right side and the wrong side of that line. And a lot of times we're hopefully walking the right side where we feel financially stable. We feel like we get to go home and turn off the lights at a reasonable time. And we see that we're growing something that's getting better. But sometimes we're on just slightly on the left side of that and on the wrong side of that line where, profits aren't quite where we want them to be. So now we feel the stress and we have to work a little harder. And now we've got to look at hiring and all these other things that if I was just an employee, I wouldn't have to think about. I could just work and turn off the lights at 5 o'clock and go home. So there's two sides to this.
I've got a buddy who is having a really hard time at work right now. And he's complaining about his boss and how his boss is always demanding a ton from him, which I totally understand because when I had a day job, I felt the same. My boss was always very demanding. But my response was, I have 230 bosses, right, that are always needing something. So if you think about all of the clientele, I feel like when you get into business, you need to understand that, yes, it's rewarding and yes, there's freedom. But there is a real trade-off for that reward and that freedom. At times, the buck really does stop with you. And while you should delegate the work, and you should have employees who are smart, and there should be systems in place, at the end of the day, you're still the business owner that has to make final decisions. Stress that not only us, but our clients share for their business and employees is hard. Now, I don't want to be doom and gloom. That's not the point of this show, right? But what I want to point out is that I think if you're in a business or you're thinking of starting a business, I do believe that's the right choice. I'm very pro-entrepreneurial. I love it. It gets me excited. It keeps me going. But there's a real honesty factor here that you need to be aware of. So let's talk real quick about time, right? Let's talk about what it's like on a day-to-day basis when you wake up in the morning as a business owner or you see your clients. What's going on out there? How are these business owners actually spending their time? Because it's not sitting on the beach with a pina colada. They punch a couple orders in on their phone, and then their staff does everything. And there are some people that have got that figured out, but most don't, right? So Dan, what are you seeing in terms of how people are spending their time?
I love the example Ryan brought up about the social media piece earlier. My kids are huge fans of Mr. Beast, which I think is really interesting because you dive into his life quite a bit, and the guy lives at his offices. Yeah. Like he literally has his house is his office building. Yeah. He lives in a room. He works pretty much 18 hours a day, and then he'll take 4 days off, and then he'll get back to it for another 2 weeks. And I think a lot of times that's really how it is. Like for some business owners, as you're getting started, it requires that amount of attention to be able to get into it. Now, comparing that to some of the clients that we work with that are on, not running multi-billion-dollar businesses like Mr. Beast, that people are trying to scrape through, the construction companies or things like that, they're grinding it out, wearing 10 different hats. They may be the person who's providing services. They may be the accountant in some cases. They may be the person doing their marketing and sales. They're wearing a lot of different hats, which also causes a lot of complication for them in how to manage where time is. And that's where I think the reason why small business owners oftentimes spend way more time than what they were planning on.
We have a phrase in our firm called peeling out. We're going to peel you out, right? And this comes up in every conversation and has for many, many years. And what this simply means is that we're very aware that as a small business, we have limited resources, time, money, attention, the things that really matter, which means that as the business owners, we usually have to do 7 jobs, 10 jobs. And so we often start by peeling people out. And Ryan, maybe you could talk to us about what that's like to peel somebody out of a role.
Yeah, and that's really what the crux of time comes down to for an entrepreneur. So I'm really appreciative that you've both mentioned it because ultimately that's what the entrepreneurial time is spent doing. It's wearing multiple hats. And the more wealth you generate and the more and more you make, generally what that means is that, okay, I'm not getting richer. I've now bought the ability to peel something out of my life. And so you're starting with 10 hats, trying to get to 3. And in that process, you don't make more money, but you're setting goals to say, I want more time in my life. And in order to do that, I've got to peel this out. I've got to peel that out. And the only way you do that is by getting more clients, doing more work, getting to a point where you're spending so much time, you go, okay, I can now afford to hire my first administrative assistant who's going to make my life better. And that hat can come off. And then, now I've got a worker and this hat can come off. And so it's really working with money and time to sit there and say, most entrepreneurs, you're going to spend a lot of time at first, and you're just trying to peel out a hat at a time if you can.
I would say, though, that you're going to spend a lot of time always in the business. I think some business owners have figured out how to be MIA, but we've serviced hundreds of companies and talked to thousands. Every MIA business owner I've ever met, the business is usually struggling or going out of business. Once the business owner steps out and says, I'm just going to live on the beach, you all figure it out and update me, I haven't seen that go well often.
I think the only time when it does is when the structure within the organization is set up for them to take breaks from the business.
Breaks is different.
And I think that's the comment I was going to make is a break or living on the beach is not this is all I do 365 days a year for 10 years, right? Like you can take a break for 2 weeks as a business owner. You should be able to be able to have relaxation, have family time, have all those things, but you have to work towards it. But I think if you can get to that position where you have that opportunity, you're able to do a lot of different things. You're able to open up more doors for your business. You're able to create better quality of life for yourself. But people who don't do that, people who think that the business is just going to run on its own without you being involved in some capacity, usually those people do fail, or they stifle their ability to grow very heavily.
I can think of specific business owners. We've worked with an IT company I can think of in the past where the business owner sort of became MIA and allowed staff to just sort of make the decisions for him. And that company quickly lost its footing and lost its way. See, here's the thing. Ryan's talking about peeling off and trading your time. You're buying time, which I agree with. But you're actually, although you're buying freedom of time, you're taking on another hat because now you've just put on the manager hat. right? So I'm going to take off the production hat, but now I got to put this other thing back on. So I have found that while I have staff, now I have a lot of one-on-one meetings, which takes up a lot of time. Sure. Making sure these people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I think that glamorous side of like, go where you want, do what you want, live how you want is a little misleading.
It can be, unless you decided you're going to be a one-man band. I think that's the one big piece that a lot of times people don't think about in that journey as well, is how big do you want to be? Because if your goal is to just grow and grow and grow,
that's a good question.
That's the context that I think comes into place. I mean, if you're the type of person who can support $250,000 a year in revenue, and that's all you need, and there's very low overhead cost to what you're doing, you can run on your own and you can have a lot of less of those stresses and hat wearing pieces. But again, it's one of those things. What are your goals? What are your desires? What's your intent as you go through it? And we've worked with plenty of organizations that also say, like, we're happy being a $5 million company. Or we have limited to zero turnover issues with our employees. Our customers are very constant. We've had the same group of people for 15 years. Like, in those situations, it's not that your system is not humming along and performing really well to where you can have that freedom, but you're also trading off that opportunity of growth. You're trading off the opportunity of marketing or all those other kind of services. And I think that's a part of that crux that you have to determine. What are the trade-offs you want to be able to get what you want or what you're looking for or what your team's looking for?
What do you think, Ryan?
It's really interesting because I love this answer, and you're going to love it too. It depends. And don't you love the answer? It depends. And so I sit there and say, sure, you can have a business where you can be wealthy and you could step aside and not be involved. But you have to pick that business model very carefully. It has to be low touch point. You have to have clients you don't talk to very often, and they have to want to pay you a lot of money for what you do. And if you can find those businesses that don't have cost and are low touch point and people want to give you a lot of money, sure, you can find a business to step aside. That's not 80%, 90% of businesses that you run into. And so most of the time you're setting yourself up to be heavily involved in this business no matter what. It's very rare that you find that gem that says, this is the business where I can just step away.
And that's because those kinds of businesses, if they exist, are unicorns, and everybody would do them. Like, right. Who wouldn't start that business? The honest truth is most businesses take a lot of time. They're going to take a lot of your money. You're going to have to mortgage your house possibly to get some cash start up and running. You're going to have, it takes a lot of emotion to really do this. And so I think you should do it. And I think we all think you should be a business owner. It is absolutely worth it. You just need to know what you're getting into. And for the person that's been doing this for 10 years, if you're waking up every day and you're thinking, okay, my accountant says I'm making $200,000 of net profit every year, but there's $4,000 in my bank account. That's the problem we're speaking to here, is you are hustling and there's not a lot to show for the hustle, right? So I'd love to take just a second and talk about how our podcast is going to address that kind of business owner and how we're going to be helping you through the series of episodes we're creating to get out of that sort of pit and start actually building real wealth and making better financial decisions. Because if you can't lead confidently with good numbers, you're always going to stay in that hole, right? So let's start by asking the question, what is it you think causes that? Why are people working so hard and still only have, $4,000 in the bank account?
I think there's a lot of lack of clarity on what it is that the company needs to actually survive. I'll use the example from the operational side of things. A lot of times we get caught up in technology and the excitement about, hey, there's this new tool or this app that's going to save me time. And now you're spending a bunch of money on that resource, and you're only using it to 10% of what the app was really built for, but it doesn't communicate with another app that you have that does something else. And so now you're manually doing that. And then all of the time you spent trying to set this efficiency system up, you're actually shorting yourself because you don't actually save. You end up spending more in software costs, you end up spending more time, and you get yourself behind. And I think that's part of that, the hope that I have in this piece is to talk about that aspect of what we've done with clients over the years and what our directive is for our own organization and why that is a part of our core product offering. Is we know that people need a standardized system. They need a better organized structure to make sure that they're not getting caught in the weeds and spending more money than they should on tools that they don't need or on people that they don't need for the system.
So that's the first move that we'll be talking about on this podcast, not necessarily in order, but chasing your tail, always looking for the better system at the expense of doing good work, right? So I'm always trying to upgrade tools or get the better software package or spend more money here because that'll make us better, when in reality, you need to work on you and your company and your processes, not buy shiny things.
And I'll use the example of like a machine shop that machine shops we've worked with in the past. Most of the time, machine shops generally run on 80 to 100-year-old equipment because operationally it's efficient for them to do it. And when they look at adding new technology, sometimes it actually is less efficient and it will cut in their margins unless they're hitting higher volumes that they're looking for. And so that's a trade-off conversation we have with people, is trying to determine what makes sense for you in that process, what makes sense for your organization on what you're trying to do. And you have to weigh those out.
Yeah. Ryan, why do you think entrepreneurs are hustling super hard with only $4,000 to show in the bank?
Let's get real. I mean, and I'm being dead serious. Let's get real here. I mean, early on in my career, I would look at all the things I had to do. And I would look at this pile and that pile and this email stack, all these things that are now on my shoulders and no one else's shoulders to do. And I would be so overwhelmed, I would do none of it. I would stare at a wall for an hour, just panicked, not knowing where to start, and I'd just be frozen. And what I've learned over the years, and you guys have heard me say this a lot of times, which is the number 16. And when I say number 16, what I mean by that is we're not very good at taking our priorities and understanding what we're supposed to do. And so you hear me a lot of times saying, of the top 10 things we have to do, that's number 16 on the list. It's on the list, but it's number 16 of the top 10. And so what I find entrepreneurs do is they try to be everything and try to put everything on their shoulders, and they're terrible at prioritizing the things that are going to be the most impactful. And so everything is a fire. And sometimes you have to make things number 16 on the list. How do
you gauge what number something is at? Is it a financial decision?
It can be a financial decision. I mean, I'm in a CFO position. And so for me, of course it's a financial decision, but ultimately it really is. It's gauging what's more important to you. Is it your time? Is it your wealth? Is it the well-being of your clients? Is it your personal well-being? How are you going to prioritize what's most important? And what are you actually going to let be number 16? What are you going to let someone make a squeaky wheel for you? That you're just sitting there listening to this, oh, yeah, I know, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. And sometimes you just have to make those priorities.
Well, I think to your point, though, one of the things that you and I, when we've worked together on clients, we've always tried to do is let's take a 10,000-foot view of the situation we're in right now. And let's look at this let's step back from the grind and the minutia that we're caught into, and let's move into this space of, well, if we tweaked one thing, what would it be to be able to get an extra 20%, an extra 30%, an extra 40%? And that's where a lot of that prioritizing comes into place when we're talking, is how do you get that in their mindset to help them to be able to shift through the process?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a real world example that has nothing to do with us. So I've had my auto mechanic for over a decade, and he's been awesome. He's been honest. He's been wonderful. Over the last year, he's picked up some pretty big contracts where he's getting fleets of cars coming in. And so I brought him one of my cars, to be repaired earlier this year. I got my car back 2 months later. I just bought a new used vehicle, and dropped it off for him to look at.
Notice the accountant had to point out that he bought a used vehicle.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a new used.
I love the accountant mentality.
So I looked at it and I took him my vehicle. I wanted some things looked at. I made an appointment because last time I learned you can't just drop it off and wait for 2 months. So I made an appointment. I dropped it off at my designated appointment time. 3 weeks later, he still had not looked at the car. What does that mean? Does it mean he's a bad guy? He's a bad entrepreneur? No, he's understood that his fleet job and this new contract he's got is more important. And I'm number 16 on his list now. And because I'm number 16, it's time for me to move on. He's going to be great from a business standpoint, and he's a wonderful person. But I recognize that I just became 16 on his list because he had to produce and work for something that's going to provide him much more wealth.
And how does that make you feel to be 16?
Well, it's a little frustrating, but at least I know where I'm at and I understand the concept and I can move on.
So that's the second move we're going to be talking about in this podcast is there's a financial aspect to prioritizing what you do. You only have 8, 10, even 12 hours in a day really to hustle on your business. You have other things to think about. And so it's very easy to get sidetracked in that time and work on a small thing that feels important because you're emotional about it rather than something that will have a financial impact that will put real cash and wealth in the business's bank account. So we'll be focusing on those. And then the third move really comes from my perspective of just being the entrepreneur. One of the things I think are really detrimental to the formation of your wealth is your level of distraction. Entrepreneurs are famous for wanting to start 18 businesses at once, right? We're just so excited to change the world and put our ideas out there and hire great people. And it's as simple as all you gotta do is hire a smart person, put a software in place, and I'll be making money, right? Isn't that what I gotta do? And Dan knows very well, no, we gotta write some SOPs, some standard operating procedures, and we gotta put some workflows in place, and we gotta have onboarding and offboarding. And my entrepreneur brain shuts down with all of that because it's not how I think. I'm just excited to build stuff. But then he has to build it. So there's like a real challenge there, right? But if you're running around the way I want to run around, which is starting 18 companies tomorrow, that is a real drain on our number one resource in our business and in your business, which is your attention, right? I think attention is probably more valuable than money because if you can focus your attention of your people and yourself, you'll make the money. But if you're spread out everywhere doing a bunch of unimportant things, starting too many businesses, you're not going to have anything to show for it. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this podcast. The operational side, don't chase shiny things, right? Even if you're using 100-year-old machines, if it's working, let's use it. Let's go. Making better financial decisions and prioritizing them so that you know where you're making money and how, and then trying to control that entrepreneur lizard brain so that you're not just jumping from island to island every time you get excited about something. It's about honing in that energy and really doing great work. So if that speaks to you, if you're the entrepreneur, if you're the person that we call hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be entrepreneur, we want to change that for you with this show. So we'll be posting episodes every week. They'll be available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere you connect to your favorite shows. And if you could do us a favor, with this being a new show, if you could take just a minute and go to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating. Let us know how we're doing. Type up a quick review if you can. That will help us to share this message with more entrepreneurs like yourself and get the show some footing in the business world. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.